Welcome back to a new year of Not Just Any Book Club. Um, we're gonna take you on down to London. Oh wait, not really. It's
That was
just
good.
grimdark
That was
fantasy.
good. That was
Um,
good.
yeah.
Clapping.
That's just what I've always imagined when people mention like grimdark fantasy. I'm always like London, it's raining. There's a guy with this really thick weird British accent. Like not the like common British accent, but like a really gruff one. And that's what I've always got in my head about grimdark. And the most famous grimdark series, which is Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire, would beg to differ on that description,
Yeah.
but that's what I think about every time.
Yeah. That's what Brexit was all about, man.
Yeah. Uh,
Political
all right.
humor.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Humor about British people. But
Never gets
welcome
old.
back from our usual December hiatus, December break.
Yeah.
Um,
We didn't have that
we
little special show that we usually like to have during
yeah
January because we couldn't think of anything. And or we didn't want to play Dark Souls and talk about the lore because what are we going to talk about? So,
yeah.
January is a
Uh,
special month for
so
us.
anyways, yeah, we're skipping straight to the books, straight to the book club. My name is Pierce, for those of you joining us in the new year, and I read The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch.
Ooh, and I'm Justin, and I read Prince of Thorns, the first book in the Broken Empire trilogy by Mark Lawrence.
Yeah, but mine is like it's called the Gentleman Bastard
Mm,
sequence or something is what he calls it in the book. Um, I
I
think
know it's part of
it's
a series, definitely.
yeah. There's multiple books. I think I saw that there were four, but I've always kind of considered it like three.
Okay.
Um, based off of the stuff that I've seen about it, it looks like he has a lot of books planned, though. I'm not gonna lie, I just pulled up the Goodreads. So maybe it's gone from a trilogy into like many. I don't know. But regardless,
A series.
um yeah. So what is grimdark fantasy?
It's
Um
kind of exactly what it sounds like. It's
yeah,
fantasy, but taken to its logical extreme where everyone's miserable all the time. It's not a good time for
and
anybody.
yeah, it's very dark. It's like I said, I always imagine like a dingy, like kind of
Like
London-like
steampunk-ish,
city.
but before that, it's like if
It's like the steampunk world before they invented like steam power, so like they don't have
yeah,
anything yet. It's kind of like dingy and not very
dirty.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Escapism.
but it can also, in A Song of Ice and Fire, which neither of us read anything from that series,
For
can
this episode, yeah.
extend to a whole world. It doesn't have to just be, one city or like a small area, which is usually what I think about when I think of Grimdark, though I'm not very versed in it. Um, but yeah, it can be anything, and it's just going for more of like a feeling across the
Yeah.
world, and it's usually like lower fantasy, like
Lower magic.
less
Like,
magic. Yeah, that's what I mean. Lower fantasy, like less magic. Not really a focus on like fantasy races or anything. Just you know, it's a fantasy world. It's kind of medieval, and there's a little bit of magic.
it's a little
Not
bit. It's
much. A little
very
bit of
low.
magic, a couple mystical creatures around, but not much. It's a special thing when you see it or
Yeah.
read it in the
But
book.
horror, yeah, and this is where like horror usually kind of infuses with the genre because if you're gonna go dark with fantasy, you may as well infuse a little bit of horror, maybe some eldritch horror, maybe some magical horror. So yeah, this genre fantasy is very flexible to doing all this stuff. And here's the thing about grimdark fantasy: just because it's dark and edgy does not make it more realistic, which people love for that to equate edginess with realism. Maybe the world isn't like that all the time. Maybe this is just a commentary on the world. I don't know, but like just because it's dark and like people actually die of just like some
Yeah.
horrific things doesn't make it more realistic. That's my big pet peeve because people are saying like I can't even go back to Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings. But well, okay, maybe I was gonna say Game of Thrones kind of spoiled them for it. That's not the case. No one has ever said that. But like people were like, I like Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire because it's so dark and edgy because it's so real.
I think the thing is with that is that perhaps some grimdark, fantasy can be more realistic than like high
Hmm.
fantasy, for instance, but it's not really the things that make grimdark fantasy that like there are other types of fantasy that are low magic, like just mostly humans, all
Hmm.
that. Like it's not just grimdark, and there's like a certain, it's hard to describe. There's a certain feeling or emotion or kind of world that's like inherent to grimdark fantasy, and those aspects of it sometimes can make it a little bit more realistic, but it's really the other things about it being like not very much magic, very few mystical creatures that make it like more realistic. And that, you know, I don't know.
Yeah,
To me, I kind of agree. It's not really like grimdark is so special in that way.
it's just
Um,
another flavor.
yeah.
So that's what I'm thinking. Um, yeah, and if we want to talk about books, if we're gonna dive right in, because we know we gave our little prelude to a
Hmm.
introduction as to what grim dark fantasy is. This one kind of takes the cream of the crop of like what is dark because the opening scene. I don't want to describe it, but it so basically it's about this guy named Jorg or Jorg as I pronounce it in my head. He's a 13-year-old kid who is like this leader of like a group of really bad thieves and villains, and it opens up with him massacring an entire village, leaving no stone unturned, killing every woman and child, and defiling them in like ways that he likes to describe in detail and with pride. Which the thing is, okay, I'm gonna criticize also one of my pet peeves in writing. I think I'll kind of splice this up with my pet peeves in writing. But first person is often used as a crutch to not give any breath to any other characters because this book is very dark and grim as I kind of described in my intro because Jorg, he's a very bad person. He enjoys killing people. He enjoys torturing people for fun, and a lot of the people around him, his friends, like to do the same. And there's not much consequence for it. It's again kind of a bold choice to make this your protagonist, who does absolutely nothing heroic whatsoever. He's sadistic, and he just likes to torture people. And there are times where it does kind of quote unquote justify. Not saying that I'm justifying it, but the story justifies it by saying that these people were worse than them, and they kind of deserved it, but at the same time, not really, because two wrongs don't make a right. But the thing that kind of surprised me most with this book was just like how far it goes with how brutal it likes to be, and does not let up at all because it goes from if we're starting at a 100, it goes to like 200 in terms of just how dark and gritty it likes to be. But I don't. Sometimes it does go a little bit too far with it because, like, I don't know. One of my pet peeves, like one of the cliches I hate the most, is like the villain who kills his own henchman, which Zorg likes to do because he likes to do it for fun and set an example. Because like that's not going to sow a rebellion against the leader. Um, but I can tell that the story is trying not to justify or glorify it, and try not to make him seem like this cool, edgy anti-hero because we've seen stories where like the guy is just like this rough and mean, and like the story wants us to root for him. And sometimes that could be misinterpreted, like the Punisher, because people like the Punisher for the wrong reasons. But it does go out of its way to justify, not justify, kind of say that this is wrong. But I don't know, because this book is written first person. Um, it the characters are just not given the side characters, at least the secondary and tertiary characters, they're not given much depth because one, George is a self-centered person, so he really is more concerned about himself and his philosophy of being a terrible person and his quest for vengeance against his slain family. Um, Rather than like giving any depth to any of these other characters, they're given like justice to be in the plot, but aside from that, they're just not given much personality that differentiates them, except from the fact that they love to torture people and love to kill people. And the good guys, from the bad guys' perspective, they the hero villains, I guess, they're kind of good because like you don't know much about them, so I'm guessing, and they're in Jorg's way. I it's just they're not given much depth, which is like kind of stymies my enjoyment of this book. And I don't know, it does seem a little bit indulgent. I like the fact that the world is a little bit interesting. The world building, I think we'll be talking about this a little bit more often. But for a first book, it's all right for the world building because it does give some glimpses into the world, but the fact is telling it from the first person perspective doesn't give you much chance to really develop the world. It gives hints into the history, and I like where the history actually goes. It's not like leaving me wanting more. It's like leaving me
So
like, go on.
I, yeah, I just wanted to ask a question about like the I guess the kind of tactics that he uses to world build. So I'll talk about it in a minute. My author uses some like very particularly he uses some very interesting strategies
Mm,
to world build. For instance, he'll use interludes to kind of like go back in time or like talk about other characters or like even give a description of an
yes.
area or region. He'll use interludes between like the chapters of like the main plot to do that. And so are there any particular strategies that you noticed that either I mean worked or did not work as well as the author might have thought they would?
I am smiling right now because I can't name anything that's super specific. They go to this one place that kind of a mild spoiler. I mean, it's kind of early on in the book, but this fantasy world is actually taking place in the future. After like a nuclear war happens, or implied like the Day of a Thousand Suns or something. Because they make modern references to like Shakespeare, and that kind of threw me off. I'm like, why are they talking about Shakespeare? And something called the Builders with a capital B. So there's something there that like just you can't really pinpoint what happened, but there's some breadcrumbs, I guess. But like
Hmm.
it's kind of the bad kind of breadcrumbs because you can't really piece it all together, and in that kind of way, it's just like it's there, but it's not developed upon. Um, and they do go to this one place that gives a little bit of history. They see like a computer, which I that threw me off because I thought this was medieval fantasy, which is kind of neat, but it's not. It's more of a mystery box, I would say, rather than it being something that is really substantial as a world building tactic. Yours sounds so
Hmm.
much better when you start talking about. I'm like, oh, I should have done that. Should have done that, but he didn't.
Well, I mean, it's interesting in the lives of Locke Lamora because he kind of like he set this first book in this series or saga or whatever you want to call it in one city. And so he's in the plot, he's telling you about the different parts of the city that they travel to. He's talking about like the ways that they get around. It's kind of like almost like a Venetian style city, but like
Hmm.
obviously dark and kind of dingy. um
Okay.
and then between um when I get to talking about my book, I'll go more into it. But like part of the main plot is that the main character Locke Lamora, with his gang, is trying to pull off this big um what would you call it? Like
Heist.
a kind of a heist, more of a scam. It's more
Okay.
of a scam, to be honest, on one of the rich people in the city. And so the way that he's doing it is he's pretending to be a one of the workers for one of the like rich families up in this city that grows some of the most famous it's like a kind of alcohol. I think it's kind of brandy, maybe. I'm not really sure.
Is
I
this
was kind of
analogous to
unclear
anything
on
in real life?
what kind of alcohol. Um so, I mean, if it seemed like they were kind of based on the Germanic peoples,
Of
so I'm
course.
guessing it's supposed to be kind of like a Riesling or like some kind of wine like that. But because they talked about like the language being really rough, and they
Mm,
also talked about like the person they learned it from was like a sailor who, and they talked about how the people in his region thought that their language was like not necessarily barbaric, but they kind of like looked down on the like northern language,
interesting.
which leads me to like what I had in my mind was like, oh, it's kind of like, Scandinavians and the Germanic peoples and whatever.
Hmm.
But um
Mine was not like that. Just
but yeah, so the part of the main plot is that he's pretending to be this person from a completely different region that we never see in the book because we're all focused on this city, and then in the interludes between the main chapters, he's the guy who trained the gang, the Gentlemen Bastards that Locke is in. He's sending them to different locations to like train with these priests and see what their way of life is like. So if you ever have to pretend to be one of those priests for like some kind of trick or theft or something, then you know what their customs
mm,
are like. And he's sending them to this city. He takes Locke out to kind of the farming regions, and he's like, Locke, you're going to pretend to be a farmer in case like
mm.
there's a future plan where you have to like do pretend to be a farmer or like a person from out in the rural areas. And then he even fills him in a little bit on his name's Chains, because he is pretending to be a priest of Paralandro.
Something.
how is it spelled? He's pretending to be a priest of one of the like gods, and he is chained. He's supposed to be chained to the uh church or whatever you want to call it, the temple. And in reality, he is a priest of the 13th god. There's only supposed to be 12. Most people only know that there are 12 because the 12 gods have cast the 13th out, because he is a thief. He's the god of thieves. Um, but they still kind of have a soft spot for him, so they let
Hmm.
the followers of the 13th god kind of do what they will, like what they please. They don't like get mad at them for impersonating their own priests or whatever.
That is
Um,
interesting.
yeah, like I keep the world building in this is really good. Is kind of the point I'm getting at. Like I feel like I was making a completely different point when I started talking, and I just
Yeah.
like continuously like unraveled some different parts of the world building. Like, oh yeah, Father Chains, he took Lockout into the um rural areas during one of the interludes, and told him about his backstory, where kind of a he was like kind of a soldier police type guy. I believe it's the yellow jackets in the city, and he was a black jacket. Um, but yeah, really interesting stuff. I'm gonna let you finish up what you
Yeah.
were talking about with yours, and then I'll get talk a little bit more about the plot and the world building. But yeah, that's what I was
Yeah.
really curious about. What your if you had any
Yeah.
world building strategies that were interesting.
So take the opposite of what you said, and that's exactly what he did. It's just like it's just brief allusions. There's not anything analogous to whatever you were talking about. It's just like not analogous to any country. There's kind of a brief reference to like necromancers and some magic, which I again, it's not usually the focus. Whatever, that's fine. So I'm guessing it's just like it's post-apocalyptic fiction, which is fine, but like it's not enough, and it's not enough for me to go like, yeah, that was some great world building, and if your world building isn't sufficient and your characters aren't interesting, and the only person you've got is your protagonist, who even though he's a terrible human being, he's very determined to do. And it's not about you sympathizing with the character; it's about you empathizing with him, and you wanted to not necessarily wanting you to root for him, but like finding the fact that he's trying his hardest and actually, overcoming the obstacles that are set against him. That's what makes you root for a character. No matter, I mean, if you want your character to be a terrible person, you kind of want them to be very competent at it, and which sure he is. Just not very likable because we get inside his thoughts too often, and he goes like, "Yeah, I see that person. I want to bash their brains in." And I'm like, "Okay, he's just a very edgy teenager," and I don't know. It doesn't make for an entertaining read. So, I mean, I don't know how I'm gonna wrap this up. I mean, I feel like I tore this book a new one, but it's like it's well written, but it's not a well written story, is how I like to
Mm.
say it. Um, Probably won't be continuing.
It's
I've heard the second book is better, and he gets better as a character, but like, eh, do I care? Not really.
Yeah, do you care enough to buy that second book and put the time into reading it is the question. Like after not liking the first book that much.
No, no,
Yeah,
that's the answer.
right. Um yeah. I mean I don't blame you. There are a million things to read. If this is a series and they can't hook you in the whole first book, who cares?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
um
I don't have anything to say besides that. I mean, I've heard the first law is very similar to it, and I actually do own a physical copy of that book. I just made it 400 pages and then got really busy with school. Now I'm going to start all over. I was originally going to read it for this podcast, but school got in the way again. Hooray. But I will definitely read it. I'm interested in the genre a little bit more, but I can tell that this probably wasn't the best book to start with, especially for the faint of
mhm.
heart, maybe like me.
Well, for The Lies of Locke Lamora, I really enjoyed it. Um I saw one of the blurbs on the book talked about it being like a swashbuckling adventure, and I was part of the way into the book at that point, and I was like, yeah, I guess. But like, whenever you think like swashbuckling, I'm always like pirates.
Pirates. Yeah.
But there's no pirates, at least not in this one. Maybe in this world, but I not in this book really. But by the end of it, I kind of get it. If that they were referring to this book and not the whole series in general,
Mhm.
I do kind of get it. It does feel like the kind of direction. And so the plot of this book follows a one Locke Lamora, who from a very young age, he loses both of his parents to a plague that only is like lethal to people older than a certain age. Like if you're really young, your body is able to fight it off. And so this whole section of the city, um, all these parents are dead. So there's a bunch of orphans, and this guy called the Thief Maker. He pays city officials to let him go in there first, and he starts collecting kids, and he turns them into thieves, basically. And Locke Lamora is much too. Um, Locke Lamora is much too. Um, hmm. He's very troublesome because he's very he tries to steal kind of above his station. He's very smart. He kind of knows his way around. He comes up with a plan. Like, he's just walking around and he'll like see something and he'll have this like huge plan. He gets very good at working with the gang. Um, and the thief maker has to sell him off
Mm.
because of a couple things that he does that go too far. And what Locke comes to find out is the reason that they go too far is because they break the secret peace, which is this kind of like there is like a de jure ruler of the area of the city called
Mhm.
a kappa, um, who he kind of gives the all of the thieves in the city because this thievery runs rampant in Camor, which is the city. Um, and in return, they pay him tribute. They pay him a percentage of everything they steal. And so it's kind of this give and take. And so he comes to find out after he's been sold to Father Chains, who I mentioned, that's basically why. I also, not to spoil the whole introduction, there's something he does that really the thief maker is like, I really have to get rid of him now, but
Hmm.
I don't want to like. I'm not gonna. I'll just. It's a surprise for people
Okay.
who decide to read it. Um, but uh, that's what happens in the introduction, basically, and then there's a time jump, and we've jumped to, um, you know, uh Locke and his kind of his siblings, the people who he was trained with, his gang are all like grown up. I think they're adults or near adults. I believe they're adults actually.
Okay.
They're for sure adults because
Okay.
there's a specific scene. It
Hmm.
would be weird to have that scene with a
Okay.
kid in a book. So they're adults for sure. They're of
O-
age.
Okay.
I'm like 99.99% sure
Well,
now that
they
I
could have pulled the
remembered that
Stephen King
scene.
and It. I don't know if
Yeah,
you
I
know what
guess.
I'm talking. No,
But
they did not do that.
um yeah, I do not think that he did that. But nonetheless, they're pulling these tricks. They've got some they've got a plan going on. They're in the middle of it. They're kind of getting ready to pull it on on one of the rich people. I believe it's Don Salvara. And he, I talked about it. Locke pretends to be his name is like
Fuck.
Lucas Fairwhite. He pretends to be a worker or like an underling of one of the families from up north who kind of ship out all those alcohol products that go apparently they go down really easily, but that you also don't feel the effect of the hangover because of
Hmm.
something that they do to the soil. It's like a secret.
I
Um
could have used that last night because I was celebrating my birthday.
um but yeah, so he pretends to be Lucas Fairwhite, and he starts stealing money from this guy. And I'm pretty much just gonna do the first chapter, I think.
That's only the first chapter.
Um, yeah,
Oh, there's a
I believe we're
prologue in the
still
first
at
chapter. Okay.
prologue in the first chapter. Yeah. Um, and there's a chapter where it goes like this book has so many like twists and turns
Oh
and
man.
like interlocking like plot lines. And so they're pulling this scam on the rich guy. And as Locke talks to him for like a whole night, and he convinces him like, oh, there's a war coming to our city, like a civil war. And so what we want to do is we want to get all of our alcohol out of the city. And but we don't have the funds to do that right now, and it's got to be secret, and the boats have to come from here. Like, we can't get boats from there. It would be too obvious. We don't want people to know we're moving that stuff out. And so he convinces um, Don Salvara to give him, I think it's like something like 25,000 money crowns. I don't remember what they're called. Um, over the course of like, a week or a couple weeks or whatever. So that way he can get everything ready. And then there's in the next chapter, there's like it cuts to just Don Salvara, and he's going up to like his chambers. And in his chambers are uh two people who are like supposed to be agents of the Spider, which is like this very secretive like police force that
Mhm.
people aren't even sure if it exists or not. They're called Midnighters, and they're like hunting down the biggest thieves and criminals. And they tell him like, "Oh, this Lucas Fairwright, he's not real. He doesn't exist. His bank account was made like a few weeks ago, and he had nothing in it until he put your check, your money order or whatever in. This is not a real person. Somebody is scamming you, and we think it's the Thorn of Camor who's scamming all the rich people in Camor. Um, and a few parts later, it cuts to Locke and his crew, and they're like doing makeup and getting
Oh,
ready
okay.
to be the Midnighters and bust into this guy's house, tell him exactly what scam they're
Okay.
pulling. So that way he'll keep handing them money because he thinks the like government has his back and is gonna like pay him back for all the money he's giving them. So that way,
Okay.
there's no way he would get like wise on them because he knows what they're doing. He just thinks that somebody else is going to repay him for the money that he's giving them.
I like
So
that.
there's
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, it's crazy. And then there's a huge plot line with the Kappa and this guy called the Gray King who's like been killing a lot of the thieves in Camor recently, and it basically everything comes to a head. His um the scam against the Don Salvara, the situation with the Gray King that Locke finds himself in, the situation with Kappa Barsavi, and he's really close with the Kappa's daughter, and that kind of all of it comes to a head, and all of it gets like really tangled together, and yeah, just really good stuff, really interesting. And I already talked about how good the world building was. Um, I think that parts of this book work extremely well because the character work also is so good.
So opposite of
Um,
mine.
I think
It's like
I
the
think
exact opposite. Yeah.
yeah, I think the antagonists, they're not, I don't think any of them are like incredible. I think the Grey King and some of the people who are working for the Grey King are interesting, probably the most interesting of all the antagonists. But what really gets you hooked is the protagonists, Locke Lamora and his gang of like 5 or 6 gentlemen bastards. They're all interesting. They're all very different. You spend a lot of moments with them together, and you get a real sense of like the camaraderie that they feel, the like brotherly love that they have for one another. Um, and so as the plot's going on and they're all working together and getting really mixed into everything and things start to go wrong, you really feel for this whole group because you know that they're pretty much a family. They're all orphans, so they're the only family some of
Hmm.
them have ever known. Some of them knew their parents before, but some of them have never had any other family besides this. And
Okay.
you really get that sense throughout the book. So it's
Hmm.
very good. I've heard good things about the Lies of Locke Lamora in the past. I will probably continue reading, even though the situation at the end of the book is very different from the situation at the beginning, which I guess is kind of what you want.
Is it like a time skip,
So
or is it just like
no, it's just like, all these plot threads come to a head, and the situation in Camor with the gentlemen bastards themselves is just so different from the situation they were in at the beginning of the book. Um that I think the second book, I don't know. I definitely want to read it at some point.
Mhm.
I'm going to keep reading this because this was just so well done. I don't see why I wouldn't. But yeah, it's gonna be different is all I was saying. Um,
Yeah,
but
I'm looking at the released books. There's only 3 out of the planned 7 books.
yeah,
So, this is a very sprawling series, I guess.
I think 4 might be released actually. Um, anyways, yeah, yeah, he's planning on writing a bunch of them.
Yeah. I think where I screwed myself over was the fact that okay, so I was crushed for time, so I kind of picked the shortest book. And this book, my book, I'm talking about my book now. I'm very interested in your book though, because it sounds awesome. It sounds like ooh, sounds like um, I something I can live vicariously through. Like the edgy anti-hero, but I kind of respect them in a way.
Yeah.
Uh,
And he's got like he has like a set of morals. Like he is edgy. Like it's kind
okay,
of inherent. Some edginess I feel like is probably kind of inherent to Grimdark. But he has a set of morals, and he's got this like, he's got people that he really cares about. And you can actually root for him. He's not like this terrible person.
wow, he doesn't fantasize about bashing in the skulls of his own men for saying something wrong because he does.
No.
This guy does it in the first, second chapter. It's just yeah.
Yeah, no, he Locke Lamora does not do that.
Yeah. It, points right there. I mean, we don't give number scores out usually here. You can check our Goodreads for that, but it's just I don't know what to rate this. It's like it's for my book. It's just like it's well written, but like it's so not for me. The fact that like it's almost insulting that I don't want to say insulting because you know there's an audience for everyone. It's just it's just kind of ew, disgusting. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you would like it more because you could stomach Blood Meridian more than I could.
Mhm.
Maybe. But I don't know, your book sounds more like I would get more out of it. Here, it's just I felt ew, icky, icky is probably the best word, and that's probably underselling how I felt after reading it. Your description alone got me like, "Ooh, oh man, that moment sounds awesome." Flashbacks and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it took it didn't take once it hooks you, it really hooks you. Um I wasn't really sure because I didn't really know anything about the book. I wasn't really sure what I was getting into in the
Mhm.
prologue. But once I probably like three quarters of the way through the prologue, I was like, okay, this is going to
Okay.
be a pretty good book.
And you had like 700 pages left, right? And then like, "Ooh,"
It's
it
only
kept on
500 pages.
only 500
Only.
pages.
Yeah, it's like
Oh,
499 or something
I don't know why I
around
thought it was
there. I think
700. I
yeah.
think it was 700. Yeah. Well, my book was not even 400 pages and felt very, very long. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to keep on ripping on books. That's beneath me. And my New Year's resolution is to probably not be that guy that kind of rips into books and is a negative Nancy. Um,
But it sounds like a heavy recommend for the Lies of Locke Lamora and possibly the Gentleman Bastard sequence in general. I haven't read more, but I definitely plan to after the Lies of Locke Lamora, and it sounds like a heavy not recommend
from
for
my
for
perspective, I think I
for
described the
your
book
book.
well. I think I described it
Mhm.
well and what you would want to get into, but like with all these caveats, it's like all right, you have to be very the specific kind of person that likes this and not disgusted by this. It's too many don't read if you're like sensitive to this stuff and or you're
Mhm.
just you don't like your protagonist to be so villainous. I mean, I don't know. Have you ever read or watched a movie with the protagonist being so repulsive and disgusting that you just like you couldn't wait for it to end? I felt it right here just reading it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. I think usually even like protagonists that are bad usually have redeeming qualities in
Yeah.
you usually. Clearly not always.
Yeah. I don't know. And okay, and here's the thing. They do try to give him a tragic backstory. I know I'm kind of retreading on old ground, but like, yeah, that's another story that trope cliche that I don't like, where you kind of try to justify the villain because he had a bad childhood or something bad happened to him, and like I guess it makes it more sympathetic, but it does not excuse his actions. I'll just
I
say
think
that
the
in proportion,
I think
especially.
that the concern with that trope is just that like especially in an age where like D&D is so popular,
Hmm.
it's like done to death because it's pretty easy to make like a slightly more, when you first have like start D&D, the reason why so many people make like edgy characters and like their first, one of their first couple characters is something like kind of edgy is because it's kind of easy, you know?
Yeah.
It's kind of easy to make a complex character because they're like edgy. They have like a tragic backstory and because of
Hmm.
this they like don't feel for people as much as they normally would. It's, not not to say it can't be done well, but
And not to say
I
it
feel
has
like
never been
it's
done well either. It's just like
right. I feel like
execution.
it's a tough line to walk because it's been done so many times and it clearly can be done really poorly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. Um, read it if you want, and read it if you're like, oh man, Justin's just someone that it's just doesn't like bad people. Then go ahead, go read it. Read it to spite me. I dare you.
Or if you don't want to spite Justin and you just want to read a good book, I would recommend not doing that and reading probably The Lies of Locke Lamora. But yeah,
Times.
on that note, I think it's a good time to end. Thank you for joining us. Please give us a like, rating, subscribe, follow, whatever it is on whatever platform. We truly do appreciate it. You can find us on Twitter and on TikTok at Not Just Any Pod. We have accounts on both of
Yeah.
those.
Hopefully YouTube.
Um,
We're trying to get this working, but YouTube might
YouTube
be a
as well.
thing.
Yes, we're trying to get on there.
You'll know by the time
Um,
this is uploaded.
yeah, by the time this is uploaded, we should be on there. And then
Next month.
what next month? True. Next month we are going to be doing Artists in Exile. So obviously for the book club episode, it'll be authors, and then for bookends, we are doing a director. Andrei Tarkovsky was exiled, like he exiled himself to escape censorship from the Soviet Union.
It is
And
one of
he
our
made
episodes.
it is an episode of bookends in which we talked about nostalgia
And we're
from
nostalgic
1982.
about the
Yeah.
times watching it. Really.
Yep.
Time after, the time
Um,
before.
it it is an episode of bookends. Would I recommend it as your first episode of bookends? Probably not. But
It's also the perfect
um,
anti-episode as well. It's art in and of
yeah,
itself.
it's not bad. If you are interested in nostalgia, um,
The movie.
the movie, maybe actually if you're interested in the movie, maybe don't check it out because I don't think our analysis is deep enough for
I
people
think
who
we
are
just talked about the
already
ending.
interested in nostalgia. We did talk in depth about the ending, I
Yeah,
guess.
if
So
you really want the true experience, watch the beginning, watch the first 5 minutes of nostalgia, and then watch the ending of nostalgia, and then you can listen to that episode.
and that's pretty much what we talked about. Yeah, that's true. If it's not clear, we record those episodes in advance. But we will also be doing Authors in Exile for the book club. Um, Oscar Wilde for Justin, Picture of Dorian Gray, and then Herman Hesse for me, or Herman Hesse, Siddhartha by Herman Hesse. So yeah, you can join us
Yeah.
next month for that. And with that,
If your name's Prometheus, goodbye. 2023
all right,
edition.
okay, I have to tell.